Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We have a very unusual and special show for you tonight. This is something I haven't done in almost 20 years of hosting this show. My guest, is a New York Times best-selling author to the tune of 450 million books sold. He's one of the foremost masters of suspense writing today. His latest novel, Ashley Bell, continues that tradition. But today, he's turning the tables on me. He'll be interviewing me about my new book, one for kids of all ages. It hit bookstores this week. Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls. It's the first installment of the Will Wilder series, and if I were going to hand the reins over to anybody, it would have to be Dean KOONTZ. He sat down with me recently at our EWTN studios in Orange County, California. Take a look. Dean, thanks so much for being here.
Well,
so take it away.
this is a great pleasure for me. You've interviewed me a number of times, and it's always appeared to be lovely. But you didn't know that I left the stage bitter.
So this is payback.
Now it's payback.
Thank you. I think, be kind, be gentle. I'm not used to sitting over here.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
As you know, I read Will Wilder some time ago.
You did indeed.
And gave you a little blurb for it because I liked it. It's the kind of book when I was a child I wished I could have had more of.
So, thank you.
And but where did this series originate, and where did you get Will Wilder from?
Well, as you know, his name wasn't always Will Wilder. His first name came out, I often say, Will Wilder was born as a soap opera, because when I was bathing the children, they'd be in the bubbles up to their necks, and they'd demand stories, fresh stories. Tell us about something, give us a story. And just to keep them occupied, I came up with this impetuous 12-year-old kid and his kind of wacky, dysfunctional family members. And they loved the slapstick nature of it. Every now and then I wove in a little supernatural thing or something scary. And I saw their response to it. But originally, this character was named Kerman Durman, which I don't even want to say because it's so hard to pronounce. And I'll tell you later why it changed. But that's where the character came from. It was really something to entertain the children. I went back then and sort of deepened, as you know, we have to do this. You come up with a backstory. And I was an actor. You know, I was trained as an actor. There was a woman, Stella Adler, who I worked with for years. Stella was a legend in the theater, trained Marlon Brando and a lot of great people. Stella had this technique where when you approached a script, you as an actor would go and write the backstory. You wrote your own biography and what does this character want? What is its action in this scene? I built these characters the same way. I did a lot of background research, if you will. And as I wrote their backstory, the series basically presented itself. And I saw where the family came from. Will Wilder has a great-grandfather, Jacob Wilder, who pops up at the top of each of these books. He's kind of a collector of relics and an adventurer himself. And Will is following in his great-grandfather's footsteps in some ways. So that's where the series came from. I really wanted to entertain kids, and then it became something much more.
Well, I wish you a great deal of luck with this because I think the marketplace needs it.
Thank you.
How much of you is in Will?
Oh, boy. You know, I imagine, like you, we've never talked about this, but I'll ask you in a second. My feeling is, when I read it, I'm in all these characters. I play all the parts. I see bits of myself in all of them, from, you know, Will to the father to, you know, Aunt Lucille and even a rather ancient evil that pops up in the book, which, I'm not going to tell you how I'm like that character, but there is a little bit of me in all of them. But I was an impetuous kid like Will. I would sort of get something into my mind and run at it. I think I'm still like that, but certainly when I was younger, I was really, I gave my poor parents a run for their money. So that little bit is absolutely like me. But the rest of the character, he's his own little person. They take on their own identities as you write them.
Yeah, they definitely do. And people often say to me, how can you write women characters so believably? And I always say, because there's a piece of me in them. And it always surprises me that people don't realize there's a piece of you in each character.
Yeah. But there is, and you don't. But I don't. It's almost as if I don't realize it until I go back, or as you've said before, your wife reads it, who knows you better than anybody, and Rebecca will tell me, "Oh, I see so and so in that character. Or, this is you, isn't it?" And, well, it's not me, but it's a piece of me, and she saw it where I didn't. And you do kind of come. One of the amazing things about this series, writing it, as you tell the story, it does reveal itself to you. And there are things in this book that, frankly, I didn't put there. They came out, they fell out in the telling. And people said, oh, I love how this, you really, the nature of good and evil, and this is what I got from the book. Well, I didn't intend any of those things. I just wanted to tell an entertaining tale that my children would enjoy and families would enjoy. But I now realize that it's much more than that.
Yeah, that's what happens to you.
Yeah.
You touch your creativity. I think I said to you recently, you find yourself in touch with a higher creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that's where these things come from. What research did you do for this? Because it's a research-heavy book, I think.
Yeah, there was a lot of research for the book. I mean, in some ways, I feel I've spent my whole life researching this book because of the acting background. That helped me get close emotionally to these characters. But then I had the challenge of the relics, and we have, at the center of Perilous Falls, at the center of the town, is this museum of antiquities, historical relics that Will has access to, a 12-year-old kid. And the story is basically, he is involved in an accident, he injures his brother, and Will is punished. And as a way to get out of the punishment, when he realizes his great-grandfather has not only secured this relic that supposedly has the powers to hold back the floodwaters of the town, but healing properties, Will thinks, okay, I don't really believe this, but if I can borrow that relic, heal my brother, I'll get out of my punishment and everything will be fine. Then I'll bring the relic back. Easy peasy. It doesn't quite turn out like that for Will. But once I committed to that trajectory, I had to figure out what relics exist, which do I want to use in the story and in the future of the series. And as you know, from writing Odd Thomas and your other series, that first book is critical because you're really laying the foundation for everything that follows. So I spent a lot of time figuring out which relics I was going to use. A lot of what's here, the opening scene in the book, Will Wilder's grandfather secures a relic in Ortona, Italy in the 1940s during the war. That scene actually happened. The cathedral was demolished, the Nazis blew it up, and some of the other facts are accurate. Now, Jacob Wilder didn't run into the ruins, but in my book he does. So I did a lot of historical research on the relics, and the rest of it kind of fell into place imaginatively.
Yeah, one thing you've done, really, I'm sure you recognize it in this first book, is you've left it be open enough. In a series, you can make the mistake of closing yourself down and not realizing you're doing it.
Oh, no.
You've got a world here that can keep opening up.
Well, that was the hard part, creating the world of Perilous Falls that Will would live in. I wanted an imaginative world that kids could feel at home in, but that had possibilities of adventure and little dark shadows. What I discovered talking to librarians, homeschoolers, teachers, boys particularly are reluctant readers. And they love not only adventure, but they like to be scared. So I walk right up to the line, and I was inspired by a few other writers here and there, including the guy at the table with me. So it was, that, in your books, I've always marveled at, your intention isn't to scare, your intention is to walk us into places that perhaps we've never explored before. And we're scared in the process, but you never cross, it's not gory, it's not gratuitous.
No.
But it is evocative and suspenseful. And it's a real gift. I mean, yours, not mine.
How difficult was it for you with your career in TV to find the time to do this?
Well, look, I always tell people, if I could pick one person I could have the daily schedule of, it would be Dean KOONTZ. Because one of the things I love about your work, and you see it, you hear it when you read your works, they read fleetly. You're lost in the imaginative world because the writer was lost in that imaginative world first. And it takes a lot of time just to immerse yourself there. My wife, thank God, was so indulgent and is all the time. She took over basketball practices and brought my dinners downstairs, which allowed me 4 or 5 hour stretches in the evening. You know, some people golf, some people watch TV. I talk to my imaginary friends at the keyboard. That's how it happens. And I enjoyed it. I mean, I enjoyed the trip. It's easier for me now to go back to Perilous Falls. Earlier on, it was harder because you were creating the walls, the trees, the blocks. Where is this? How does this fit in?
Once you've seen it in your mind, you can revisit it.
Right,
Yeah.
but it's hard when you're building it,
Yeah.
as you know. I wish you'd warned me, Dean. I would have had somebody else write this series.
Let everybody suffer with the first
Oh,
time.
thanks. The bleeding. You see the blood on every page. Hopefully it's not apparent.
Why did you want to write middle grade?
You know, people have asked me that. You've written so much for adults. Why do you want to write for kids? But I like that L. Frank Baum line, the author of The Wizard of Oz. He often said, I write for the young and the young at heart. And that's really who I'm writing for. I mean, there are things you can do in children's fiction because they're still open. There's still a sense of awe and wonder that they have. They'll go further down that path with you more quickly than an adult will. And I think the reason half of the readers of Kids Lit, which I didn't know, 50% are people 18 and older. Because I think we're all thirsting for that adventure, that sense of awe and wonder and the spectacular, the miraculous. And that's all in this story. And I wanted people to take that journey. And as you and I have talked about before, books have healing properties. Books, I think particularly when you're in that beautiful age between 5 and 13 or 14, you're still being formed. You're on the precipice of adulthood, yet you still have the eyes of a child. And that's a great time to capture an audience, and you have their attention. It leaves a deeper mark, I think, when you read as a young person. And I wanted to be at that table. I wanted to invite people to that table.
I've always been a reader of young adult fiction.
Really?
As long as I can remember, from when I was a young adult to now.
Really?
And so I think you're right about that. The readership spans, and it's a good way to go.
It does.
How is this series different from other middle grade series?
That's a good question. It is different in this sense. Ms. Rowling had her witchcraft and wizardry was kind of the central axis of her series. Rick Riordan has the Percy Jackson series, and Greek gods and Greek mythology is the centerpiece of that. Mine, it's sacred antiquities, historical relics. That is the centrifuge that sort of drives this story and the spine of all of these books. I wanted to also tell a story that had an intact family. And you know how hard that is. Yeah. It's much easier to write about a single protagonist alone, abandoned, orphaned, searching for his parents. It's much harder to tell a family saga. But I felt called to do it. It kind of fell out in the writing. And the family enriched this story in so many ways. The great Aunt Lucille, his great-grandfather. And I always tell people, the scope of the story is sort of Percy Jackson meets Indiana Jones in The Exorcist. That's sort of what this story is. And, but I hope it becomes also, and I've seen it in the early letters we've gotten from early readers, it's a conversation piece for kids, for their parents, and it really is about how we as people rely on the choices of the past, the choices made by our parents and our grandparents, and how, for good or ill, that shapes our destiny and our future. And we can't ignore that. We can change it. We have the ability to change it, but we don't have the right to ignore it.
Yes.
And if you do, you run into awful problems. And Will straddles that middle place. He wants to go in his own way, but he comes in contact with his great-grandfather's legacy and how he fits into this prophecy that he uncorks quite by accident.
Well, you've done all that very well, and
Thank you.
the relics featured in it, how did you choose them?
Oh boy. The relics in this book, I wanted one to be, have real mystical power. They both have supernatural powers. But the first one was the finger bone of St. Thomas. And you're familiar with an odd Thomas. And there actually is the finger bone of St. Thomas in a church in Rome. You can find it in the Church of the Holy Cross in Jerusalem. So I wanted relics and antiquities, and throughout the book they're scattered, that you can actually see in museums, in churches, because it's important for us to reclaim these touchstones, understand why these were venerated, what they mean today to us. Because I think they aren't only part of a Christian heritage, they're part of a Western culture. And I think literacy demands that understanding, historical literacy. And so it's that's why I chose those two relics. The second relic is the relic of the mantle of Elijah from the Old Testament. Now, the mantle has been lost to time, but in my book, it's in the museum in Perilous Falls.
And we know from the name of the town, it's going to have a lot of dark adventure.
Yeah, well, you don't want to spend too much time in Perilous Falls, but there's a sunny side when he's not unleashing horrible things on the populace.
And Will has a supernatural gift.
He does.
Sees demons that others find invisible. Tell us about where did that come from?
Well, I wanted Will to have a supernatural gift, and I liked the idea of a child who saw what nobody else could see, and how that gift, which he initially is running from, since the time he was 5, he's been seeing these little shadows, but as he ages, the shadows hold, and when he turns to look at them, they actually have form, and they're becoming clearer to him. And in the book, they become all too clear, and he can even interact with them. What we find out, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but this gift is part of a prophecy, and many people have been waiting a long time for Will to come along. And it really, again, this is one of those things that I never intended, but I discovered in the writing. The gifts we're given are not ours to keep to ourselves, but we have an obligation to perfect them, to nurture them, and to share them with others. And Will learns that lesson in the course of this story. And there are all kinds of, I mean, other people have written me about the allegories they saw in his sight, but some of that, you know, I think is just part of the story and not necessarily something I put in there. So I always think, and I'm sure you agree with this, we do 50% of the job by committing the story to paper. The other 50% happens in the reader's mind, in their heart, in their soul. And it's been interesting to see the reaction of people to the work. And it's often not the reaction you had to it, right?
You sometimes, you mentioned earlier about children at that age being able to fall away in their imagination quicker into a story. One of the things that frustrates me most is I will get letters from readers who will take a book like Ashley Bell, my recent one, and there was something to say, I just couldn't possibly believe that. And I would say, but you see, that's why starting with the audience you're starting with is so satisfying. Right. And that is, I sometimes think, somebody like that, because as a reader, I can believe anything. Right. If the writer does the job.
Exactly.
So I always think that if somebody says that to me, their imagination was never honed. It was always left undeveloped.
Yeah, they don't want to go on the journey. They don't want to go on that imaginative journey. And that's sad. I mean, I feel very sad when people won't go down that path.
Well, thinking of going on the journey, the Will Wilder series almost didn't happen, but it ended up at Random House. Tell us about that.
It did. No, my journey to get this book published was almost as treacherous as Will's to get the relic back that he loses at one point in the book. Initially, this book was at another publisher, and due to disagreements, I bought the rights back, which is, as you know, something a writer almost never does, probably shouldn't do, and you only do when it's a dire situation, and in this case it was. But my agent at the time, Loretta Barrett of Happy Memories, said, I've never had a client do this in 35 years, but I think you're right to do it. Yeah, I think you need to do it. You need to save the series. So I bought it back, and then only a few months later, my agent died of a brain tumor. Oh. So I'm here with this book that I've worked 7 years on. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I approached some publishers with it. One was really interested, and a friend of mine said, let me take it to Random House. I said, Chip, my friend Chip Flaherty, I said, Chip, I've been publishing at Random House for 10 years. My editors there say, this type of middle grade adventure fiction is just not what they're looking for. But if you want to take it to Random House, fine, have at it. But I'm already talking to some other folks. Well, he took it to Random House. I get a call a few days later from Barbara Marcus. Now, Barbara Marcus will probably mean very little to the viewing audience. She is the Wizard of Oz of children's literature. Barbara Marcus is the woman who not only bought, acquired, but launched the Harry Potter series when she was at Scholastic. You know, the midnight signings, the rollout of the book, the whole thing. I mean, she brought Harry Potter to America. So she really has a very sharp eye, and she loved the series. She said, we want to publish this. Kids are going to love this adventure, and I love the concept of the series. Why did you want to acquire the Will Wilder series for Random House?
I think there are several reasons. The first is the first tenet. I thought children and boys and girls would really like to read it. It's a great read, it's a great romp, and that's really important because we want kids to read. I actually think it's going to fit in quite well to the marketplace because of the adventure aspect and because it is really sort of a thrill-a-minute, great family, great adults. So in some ways it has sort of the cornerstone of every solid series. The other reason we wanted to publish is it's that interesting balance of adventure and history, and that to feed children real facts in a fun way is really a wonderful thing to do because they need that balance.
What do you want kids and all readers to take away from the Will Wilder series?
I want them to feel empowered, both from the reading experience and from what Will is willing to do, and that what even more his friends, who are clearly terrified, are willing to do for friendship. I want them to take away some learning. I learned a lot reading the book. I did not know the things you are talking about in the book before I read it, but really I want them to come away feeling satisfaction of a wonderful read. And I think that's what you have given them. And I think that when kids get to know Will, they will see themselves in Will because he is not perfect. He is flawed, but he wants to do the right thing and has a wonderful sense of adventure.
I can truly say, in 10 years of publishing, I don't have anything near the KOONTZ track record, but I have never had a publisher and an editor, Phoebe Ye at Crown, my editor, Emily Easton. I've never had a group embrace a work like this and so champion it on all fronts. I mean, they have really brought their A game to it. I'm humbled that Barbara and the whole team, you know, has so taken this under their wing. And it is, of course, the perfect home for Will. It's just the perfect spot for him.
Now, they'll do a great job.
Oh, well, but that's right. We're at the same publisher
Yes,
now.
and
Yeah.
that won't redound to your disfavor.
No, no, and it hasn't so far.
Why should boys and girls read this series?
For a number of reasons. I think, first of all, boys are going to relish this adventure. I mean, it's a romp. There's a lot of satirical fun around the edges. Will is a kind of, you know, he's a wise guy. He's a kid who doesn't believe things at first sight. He's shrewd. He also has this ability, though, when he feels he has to do something, he throws everything at it. He abandons all reserve and kind of takes his friends with him, and they go on this fantastical adventure. Boys are going to love that supernatural ride. The girls are going to, I think, love the ride as well. They're also going to love the characters here. Aunt Lucille, the great Aunt Lucille, is kind of, she's a surprising character. I can't reveal everything about her, but girls are going to love her. She's a strong female lead. His friend Cammie, Will's friend Cammie Merriweather, is also, you know, a really smart, sharp kid. I think kids are going to want to go on that journey, and there are so few places for them to go where they can take part in a series, have something to discuss with their friends, and it challenges them in one respect because they're encountering history. They're encountering history at every stop, and even unraveling some of the challenges requires a little understanding. So they learn along the way. One of the early readers said it reminds them of, you know, National Treasure. You know, it has kind of that chase quality about it, and you have to unravel the riddle to get to the next chamber. There is some of that here. And then there's the supernatural dimension that I thought important to put in the work. And so for all those reasons, I think kids are going to love this series. And the letters I've gotten, Dean, have been so gratifying and touching. I got a fifth grader wrote me, Braden wrote me, and he said in the letter, on every page I felt like I was with Will. In fact, I felt like I was Will. And he said, and what I learned is that a 12-year-old can really change the world. And then he can do something else and restore everything back to normal. And I thought, this is why I write. This is exactly why I wanted to write for kids. It is touching them and reaching them. And if I got no other review or no other letter, that would suffice for me. I mean, it was just one of those great, beautiful letters.
One of the things I loved about this book was something that I now and then get criticized for. And they say, your children are always so smart. They're always so engaged. They're mature beyond their years. I don't think that's true.
No.
I've known many children like the ones I write about, but I think I don't see it very often. Kids are, when adults are not writing for kids, or even sometimes when they are, they sort of write down.
Right.
And you didn't do that.
No. Kids are very sharp, particularly today, Dean. I mean, I see it in my own kids. I mean, the nice thing is, I have my children and their friends became my test audience for the book. I would write a chapter and then read it to them. And let me tell you, they are brutal critics. That's boring. Why are you putting that in there? Take that out. That character's stupid. But I really like this one. And I'm like, you like that one? So, I went back and I rejiggered things. But it was amazing watching their reaction to certain moments of the book. And they're a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So I thought, I'm going to write the children that I've encountered, my children and their friends, and they're really sharp. In fact, sometimes they're smarter than the adults I know because they're seeing deeper. They're seeing in a different way. And Will Wilder has that ability as well.
Yeah. Well, it really works. And
Thank you.
Now, families should read this together, I think.
Well, there's been a lot of letters I've gotten from families where the kids come to the parents and say, is this true? Is there a finger bone somewhere in a play? It encourages that kind of questioning. And the parents are going to get one story here, Dean. It's like reading a Dean Koontz book. You can take the ride. It's a great story. The plot points are fascinating. They're cliffhangers and turns. But if you're looking for something else, if you have the eyes for it, there's an entire other narrative here. So the parents, I think, are going to come away with one story. The children are going to take quite another. And I hope, my goal is, it's the type of book that I love and that I read as a child that you can mature with. And when you go back to it as an adult, you see things you never imagined and you totally missed on the first reading as a child. And that's what I want for the Will Wilder series, and I hope is in place.
I think that will happen.
Thank you.
You've interviewed presidents, popes, actors, actresses,
Authors.
writers. What is it like to be interviewed yourself?
Oh boy, it's weird. It's a little weird because I'm so used to, people don't realize when you're doing an interview, it takes a certain sinew because you have to really engage the other party, but you're also guiding this interview. So depending on what you're telling me, I'm thinking, okay, I've got to throw out that question. I'm going to have to move here. I'll come back for it later. You are kind of, at least I, reshuffle the deck as I move through an interview, and that keeps me engaged. It's almost like writing. When you have to be in the moment and fully committed, and that's how I conduct an interview. So this is strange because it's a little, I feel I'm a little out of control, Dean, which is not a bad thing.
I've always felt you're a little out of control.
I know. My mother and wife say the same thing. You're very out of control, right?
But now, being a journalist, essentially, how did that affect the writing of the book?
I was thinking about that as I was talking to some of the folks at Random House about promoting the book. One of the ways that I think this has happened, that the journalism affected this book, I have visualized and seen in person relics of varying antiquity and age all over the world. And up close, I mean, some of them, they've taken them out of the reliquary, and I've seen them. When you begin to encounter these objects up close, it is a different experience. And I've done a lot of research on some of these relics that I've written about or done pieces on. And the other part of the job is, for me, it's a great boon and an enormous blessing as an author. I get to encounter people in a multiplicity of disciplines, and I see them in their natural environments. So that's taken me to the White House, to the halls of the Vatican, to Dean KOONTZ's house, to Jerry Lewis's house. When you see people up close in their world, you do pick up an essence of them. And it helps me as an author when I'm writing about a judge or a mayor or a conservationist at a museum. I've met these people, so I sort of know their daily patterns and the way the mind thinks. And then, of course, then you layer in the character. How are they different from that archetype, that profession? But it has given me a front row seat to see the world and creative, wonderful people up close. And that inevitably is going to cook down and work its way into the fiction.
I've had the experience of talking with somebody who's becoming a friend, and I'm always interested in what they do in their life or whatever, and there's a sudden glazed look, and they say, "Are you going to make me a character?" Because they think I'm picking.
Well, we are scavengers. You have to admit it.
We are.
We are scavengers. Mary Higgins Clark had a great line. She said, "I love writing murder mystery." And I said, "Well, why?" She said, "I can kill all my enemies." And I kind of like that. And I don't do that here, but you do. But there are essences of people that you picked up that either rubbed you the wrong way or you just didn't feel comfortable with. You can layer those into different characters, and they work. It works.
My wife, and your wife is the same way, I'm sure, she recognizes those fragments of other people, especially the people that we both didn't like.
Oh.
And she sees them in there.
Oh, well, Rebecca hasn't figured some of those out. So, and I'm not telling.
She will.
Thanks.
You started a literary initiative. What is it and why is it needed?
Story-Ented sort of came from my conversations as I was doing research and shaping this series. I was talking to librarians, teachers, homeschoolers, parents. I wanted to know what kids needed, what they were attracted to. And as you know, when you talk to librarians, they understand everything. They encounter kids every day. They know their appetites. They know what they're gravitating toward. So it helped me fill the void here because they told me, look, we have an adventure deficit. The kids like scary books, but they've read all the R.L. Stine books. So I split the difference here. And I said, you know, I've got to layer that in. That was something I hadn't thought of or I didn't initially think I would lean on, but I'm going to lean more into it. And in the process of talking, I appreciated the deep illiteracy epidemic we have here in the United States, and it is profound. When I learned that 1 in 5 high school graduates cannot read their diploma, Dean, we've got 45 million illiterate people in the United States. This is, and you'd say, okay, well, there's a lot of dumb people in the world, you say. Well, they're not dumb, first of all. They're not dumb. They just can't read. And it's our obligation, I think, to not only help them to literacy, but the consequences of not doing it are profound. When I realized there are municipalities here in your state of California, they project the building of prisons 10 years ahead of time. And do you know what they predicate that on?
Illiteracy.
3rd grade reading level. 3rd grade reading level is the foundation of our prison system. This is outrageous. If we know there's a link between illiteracy and incarceration, why aren't we doing more to stem the problem before we have a problem? And I wanted to do something about that. So I founded Story-Ented.
You risk getting me on a hobby horse of mine.
Okay, good.
We have, one of the reasons is that we get swept up in these theories of education, and then we force them into the school system, and they don't work, and 15 or 20 years goes by, and then there's a new one, and that doesn't work.
Right.
Instead of going back to what has worked from antiquity.
Exactly.
And I even saw statistics that 50% of kids that in New York City schools end up not learning how to read above a 3rd grade level. They drop out too. I know. And it's tragic.
No, it is, with horrible consequences. So my vision was, and I think you share this, if you find your story, you'll find your way. And I want kids and adults, but firstly kids, to have enriching, nourishing, fun, engaging fiction, because fiction does something that nonfiction doesn't. It helps us empathize with people. It helps us understand. You're sharing the heart and the mind of another human being, imaginatively. And they've done studies, reading Dickens, reading lines of Dickens to people in MRIs. They put them in an MRI and they put the audiobook in their ears. And what they've discovered, this is NYU did this research, my alma mater. They discovered when people are in the MRIs, the same area in the brain ignites. Fiction is a brain device. If we know that, Jesus Christ knew this. He only spoke to the people in parables, in stories. So my hope here is we can bring together authors of great fiction with their readers, young and old, schools, classrooms, in real time. What we do is we do an interview with an author, and then the audience has a chance to call or email their questions in to that author. So it's a real reader-author engagement. They can read the book ahead of time, join us for a story, we call it a storyintation, where you're orienting yourself in the world of that author. We do a flyover of all the work, and then we talk about the new work. And it has been warmly received. We've had amazing authors on, and you recently joined us. So I hope it goes on, and the nice thing is there's a living library so that years from now, people can pick up that book and they can go watch that author and get a deeper understanding of the work and what it means to them. And it unlocks keys in the book that you perhaps would never have been able to open without.
Okay, what book or books in your childhood had that powerful effect on you, never to be forgotten?
Well, one of them, the two that always stick out, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I loved, and the other was Charlotte's Web.
Oh,
those were the two kids' books that left the deepest mark on me. Charlie, because you know, he was a character. I didn't know poor people like Charlie. I mean, you really felt so bad for Charlie Bucket in the beginning of that book. And then, of course, he's the one chosen. I always tear up when I think about it. He's the one chosen, you know, of all the kids. And they've got the wealthy kid, and they've got the other kid. And it's simple, humble Charlie Bucket who's the one plucked up and brought into Willy Wonka's world. And then, of course, he's given the key to the kingdom at the end because he was the only one who was true. And that book it's magic to me. I've always loved that book. And of course, Charlotte's Web, because it's beautifully written.
Yeah.
And the lesson there about every life having such worth, even animal life. Every life is used is necessary. Every life is necessary for an important end, and it all ties together. And I love that.
It's I read Charlotte's Web as an adult.
Really?
And was moved to tears.
Yeah.
When the little pig and all of Charlotte's babies start hatching, and they're all floating away, and he's not going to have any more of Charlotte.
No.
But then, of course, he does. Because,
Yeah.
And it's, I thought that was just a piece of genius to do that.
I know. You know, E.B. White said he came upon that. He was walking into the farm, and again, this is the eyes that I hope people reading not only my series but your work, any work of fiction that is truly engaging, that it gives us the eyes to appreciate the wonder of the world again. You know, my friend Richard John Newhouse used to always say, the world is far more wonderful and filled with miracles than we ever imagined. And that's what I hope my work is filled with. E.B. White walked into his farm in upstate New York one day. He was cleaning out the slop for the pig that they were going to kill, and he looked up into the corner, and there was this little pod up there hanging, and it was a spider's pod filled with little eggs. And he was fascinated by it, and he would check on it every day. That's where the whole story came from. But it was his eyes seeing the miracles all around us, that this little cottony patch hanging from the corner of his farm would create thousands of little spiders that would then go on and spread spider webs and continue life all over his farm. The recognition of that little thing created this timeless story that has touched generations. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah. It's, you once asked me in an interview how getting a dog affected my life.
Right.
That was the key thing. I'd gotten to a point in my life that I didn't look as closely at the mundane things. And when you walk a dog, the dog wants to smell this, wants to look at that. And the dog takes its own pace, and it opened me up again to all of that.
Wow.
And I always say in interviews that the one thing I want people to walk away from anything I write is a sense of how incredibly full of wonder and mystery the world is. Because that is, if you can recognize that, and it's the thing that people blind themselves to.
I agree.
Because it's scary.
Yeah. Oh, well, there's a burden with seeing things as they are, but there's such wonder and beauty that we're missing, and our children are missing. And I hate when kids are sitting around a table, and they're all. This is the kid.
Yes.
You got 4 kids and a parent. We were at dinner last night. They're cutting themselves off from precious time with mom and dad, moments of engagement and an understanding of the world that they will miss, they'll never get. This book, I really wrote it so that those generations could reconnect and we could excite kids again about the wonder, the mystery of ourselves, of our history, and of the world around us.
Yeah. Well, you've done a job.
I'm trying.
If you could choose a writing mentor.
Oh, well, if I could choose a writing mentor to
living dead, either.
Well,
not living and dead.
If it were living, it would be the guy at the table, Dean KOONTZ. But here's the problem. You're so darn busy, you wouldn't be able to. There's no time for you to mentor me. You're always working on your own. I know. You've already turned me down. If it were somebody in the past, you know, I would love to bend Roald Dahl's ear. You mentioned Dickens when we talked last. Charles Dickens isn't. I would love to talk to Charles Dickens and Mark Twain. Mark Twain, who wrote one of the great, I mean, it's the classic American adventure. I think Huck Finn. It's the pace. I think the pacing of that book is hard for younger kids now. But boy, if you can float on that raft a little bit, it is quite. It's wondrous. And I've always been fascinated by Twain, Dickens, and of course my boyhood obsession was Sherlock Holmes. I love the Sherlock Holmes books. I read all of them from top to bottom. Conan Doyle is someone I would definitely want at my table.
I have never read Dickens until I was 30-some.
Really?
I faked my way in school, and first thing I picked up was Tale of Two Cities.
Oh.
And I got so captured in that. And second, I finished it in 2 days. And the second night, it was like 3 in the morning when I finished it. And I got to the end of that, which is the most beautiful ending.
It is.
And I was just sobbing. And I woke my wife, and she said, "Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong?" I said, "I'll never be able to write like this."
Yes, you have. Oh, yes, you have. But it is beautiful. His works are just Pickwick Papers, and oh my gosh, yeah, there's nothing like it. Oliver Twist. Yeah, we visited his home. I took the boys to London, and you know, now that I talk about this again, this is really about Will Wilder as well. I took the boys on a trip to London, and I said, I want to go to Charles Dickens' house. They said, why do we want to go to Charles? I said, it's important for you to go to Charles Dickens' house. So we went, and there's his writing table, uncovered right there. You can lay your hands on it, where he wrote such amazing, you know, these works that have endured. And to be there and to, again, touch what is left, this relic in some ways. Now my boys are reading Dickens. They had to read Christmas Carol for school. They had to read Oliver Twist. So they're really encountering the work, and they're like, we're so glad you took us to Charles Dickens' house. I talked about it for 10 minutes today in class. It enriches the experience. And what I want is for kids to encounter the relics with Will and tell their own stories, talk to their mom, their dad, their grandparents, figure out those stories and touch again the things that have meaning to their families and to us as a culture. That's really what this is all about, and this whole series.
Yeah. Well, George Martin, who is very successful at the moment, says there are 2 types of writers. There are architects and gardeners. Do you agree with that? I don't know. Which one are you?
I kind of agree with it. I know Dean KOONTZ is a gardener, but I'm an architect, I think. You know what it is with a series this large? I don't know how you did the Odd Thomas series of 8 books and kept track of all those characters without outlining to some degree. I still don't understand.
I never outline.
Never outline. You just keep it all in your head. Character ticks, taglines, all of that. You have a much better, you know what it is? Your mind is better than mine. I have binders. I have character binders. I have a schematic of broken down by chapter. And then there's a column for each character. And I make notes in that just to keep myself straight because it's so overwhelming, I would lose my way. Now, I'm not a slave to that outline. The outline is just a guide. Many times, as you said, the story starts turning on you. Will tells me something else, and I've had to just throw away part of an outline. But it gives me the confidence to dive in. I don't think I could have started this series without outlining the first book extensively, and all the subsequent books, I did the same.
I started out writing outlines for the first dozen or more books, but eventually gave them up. And by the way, I bought back 20 different books of mine.
You did?
Yes, I'll tell you about that.
Okay,
someday.
later. Another episode, don't miss that one.
If you could write anything else, what would it be?
Harlequin romances, I think. No, no, I would write bodice rippers. No, I would write a mystery series. I've always wanted to write a mystery series, and I have one rattling around in the back of my head. I've got a great protagonist, but with Will, I don't have time to, to bring that protagonist quite to life. But I will eventually. It's a good story. I love the characters, but I've loved mysteries since I was a kid. I read all the Agatha Christie books. I read Rex Stout, the Nero Wolfe. What a great! He's another one that I'd want to invite to dinner. Rex Stout. Just the form of that, and to propel a character through time. 40 books, 50 books with the same character. Rex Stout, Agatha Christie, James Lee Burke, a beautiful writer. Oh my gosh! Again, who captures? They capture that world, and you want to go back, but to keep it fresh for so long.
Very difficult.
That's a very difficult challenge.
Very difficult. One of my great pleasures in life was being asked to write an introduction to a new edition of a Rex Stout book.
Wow.
And I felt very honored and sort of like, I better not mess this up.
No, don't mess that one up. Are those great books or what?
They are.
I love Nero Wolfe.
I've read every one of them.
Archie Goodwin.
What 3 books for the middle grade readers would you recommend they read?
Books that I would recommend. I love Wonder, which is a fairly recent book by Placido. That's a wonderful book. And it's about a boy with deformity that teaches everyone around him something. And I love that book. There's Charlotte's Web, of course. Peter Pan I love. Peter Pan is probably one of the most beautifully written books. That's one I weep every time I read it to the kids. They can almost predict it. In fact, my oldest will go, uh-oh, Daddy's about to cry. Here it comes. And sure, I turn the page. And then they went back to Neverland. She was too old to fly. I always, that breaks me up. I don't know what, I think I know what that is. Sometime I'll tell you. There's a family story connected to it that I think it triggers that emotion. But I've always loved the wonder of Peter Pan. It's an adventure. It's really about growing older and life, and when it's time to leave the things of childhood, which I haven't quite passed yet. I'm not there.
I was wondering, when is that?
No, that's not going to come. When they put me in the ground. No.
Where do you write?
I write in my office, usually, which is downstairs in our house. But many times the kids are playing, it's a basement office, and the kids have their playroom outside of it. So sometimes it's a little too clamorous. So I get in the car and go to a coffee shop, and I have a corner seat at a coffee shop. I like the hum of humanity around me when I write, because I can kind of hyper-focus. And it's there, but I don't have to pay attention to any of it. I don't listen to music. I can't listen to music when I write for whatever reason. Orchestral, lightly, but no lyric. I can't listen to lyrics at all. Do you listen to music?
I've written whole books to one album. I listen to it 100 times. But it only can be something I know. And then the lyrics don't bother me.
You tune it out.
But I'm with you. Either it has to be pure music, no lyrics.
Orchestra.
Or I wrote an entire novel to a Paul Simon album, and there was a Hawaiian singer, Israel Kamakawiwo Ole. I wrote 2 entire novels to listening to him, but I knew the lyrics.
Yeah, so you could tune it out.
Yeah.
And that's what I don't mind a coffee shop. I like the sparks of life around, but I don't have to give it any notice. I just sort of get lost in Perilous Falls.
best advice to parents to get their kids to read more?
Oh, this is one of the goals of Storyinted. It not only features interviews with best-selling authors and influential authors, but we really want to inspire a lifelong love of reading in kids. There are two great things. First of all, I think every parent should take their kids to a bookstore, every parent, or a library, and let them free roam. Let them find the things that interest them and then talk to them about it, figure out why, and then help guide them to those books in that area, things they might like, things that will challenge them a little bit. The other thing that inspired my love of learning, I'll tell a little tale. Up until 5th grade, Dean, I really was not much of a reader. I read comic books, I read comedy books, I read little things. I didn't really read novels, books, short stories, but not books. I had a 5th grade teacher in New Orleans, Brother Raphael, and he did a marvelous thing for me. And this would be my bit of advice for parents, teachers, anybody. He picked up an Ellery Queen novel. Ellery Queen were two writers who famously wrote multiple books, and Ellery Queen was the detective in it, but Brother Raphael did something so marvelous. He read the book, maybe 2 chapters, so the murder happened, and there were all kind of red herrings, and then he said, and Ellery Queen walked onto the scene. He closed the book, he put it at the end of his table, and he said, "Gentlemen, if you'd like to know how the story ends, the book is here." And we're all, you know, it's like getting to the end of, you know, a movie, and they suddenly kill the projector. So naturally, we all, you know, elbowing and popping each other to get to the book, and that was what really started my love of reading and launched everything, everything from there on. I can trace it back to that moment, because I would never have gotten into the theater. I would never have loved reading or writing or had the respect for it that made me want to eventually do it, had it not been for that one act. So I hope people use that.
Attendant to that, one thing that parents should never do
Yes.
is say, you can't read mysteries because they're trash. You can't read science fiction or horror or whatever because it's trash. I heard that as a child so much.
Really?
And that usually comes from people who've never read any of those genres.
You're right.
And of course, there's trash in anything.
Right.
But there's also fine work in anything.
You are right.
And so just trust the child that is developing
They'll
a taste.
find their way. They'll find their way. Look, we had a teacher, one of my sons had a teacher. I don't think I'm telling too big a tale. They won't kill me. And the teacher told him, "What are you reading?" And he said, "Well, I'm reading the Kingdom Keepers series." I said, "Oh, why are you reading that? What are you reading that for? You should be reading Tolkien." Well, wait a minute. He can read both. He can read, and we encourage him. I told the teacher, "Look, I encourage him to read everything, not just one thing." And I worry at times, if you force a great work upon a child not ready for it, they will never go back to it. People make this mistake with Shakespeare. Now, I love Shakespeare. I hear Shakespeare every day. I mean, as an actor, it was always in my mouth and my ears. When I'm driving, I have great, you know, highlights of Shakespeare, Olivier and Gielgud. I put it on in the car. I love hearing that. However, it's not for everybody. And I think if you don't immerse people in it at the right moment, when they're ready for it, you'll lose them forever. They'll never go back to it.
There was a lot when I was growing up as a kid of pushing Shakespeare into you in junior high. I've often said probably the most hated novel of my generation was Silas Marner, because we were forced to read it, and it was no interest whatsoever to kids our age.
No.
So that, I don't think I could ever go back and read Silas Marner, and I'm sure it's...
Yeah, it's a perfectly good book, but it turns you off to it. And that's why I wanted to capture kids. In writing the Will Wilder series, I spent a lot of time studying where these kids are, what they're looking for. And then how do you meet them halfway? How do we give them an adventure, something that's nourishing, thought-provoking, challenging, but takes them on a real ride, one they want to go on? And I hope a lot of reluctant readers will find it. And it seems that's happening.
Well, I'm going to be buying the book and giving it to friends, so I hope a lot of people do that.
Well, you let me know. I'll sign away. I'll personalize it for you. Thank you so much for taking over the show.
Well, it was a pleasure. I'm not an interviewer, but you're an excellent interview.
You could have fooled me.
He alone can see them, the dark things we ignore. 12-year-old Will Wilder sought a relic with rare powers. Now, he has awoken an ancient evil, and the only way to save the town of Perilous Falls is to embrace his destiny before it's too late. So long as he isn't grounded at the time. Chip Flaherty calls it a pulse-pounding page-turner. Think Indiana Jones meets Percy Jackson. Mary Higgins Clark-Ray's Will Wilder is a brand new, refreshing, intrepid young hero who magically combines humor and genuine suspense. The search for the next epic, must-read adventure series is over. Will Wilder, The Relic of Perilous Falls by Raymond Arroyo. Available now wherever books are sold.
My thanks to Dean for the great conversation. Dean Koontz's latest novel, Ashley Bell, is available at bookstores everywhere. And remember, I'm on the Will Wilder book tour now. On Saturday, March 12th, I'll be in Corpus Christi, Texas, at Half Price Books on South Padre Island Drive at 1 p.m. Then on Sunday, March 13th, I'm going home to New Orleans for a visit to Octavia Books Uptown at 1 p.m. Then it's on to Milwaukee, Orlando, Florida. Be sure to check RaymondArroyo.com for all the dates in your area. Can't wait to see you, and bring the kids. Well, that's all the time we have. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com. And don't miss our show next week. In honor of Jerry Lewis's birthday, an encore presentation of my exclusive with the comic legend. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you next time and on the road. Bye now.